Hey, Amanda, great to see you today. And thanks so much for taking time out of your day to come on the show and share what you're working on these days and the value of SparkToro. I'm really excited to dig in, and we're going to get into market research and specifically how SparkToro fits into that, but also just broadly applicable strategies and tactics around understanding your customers better and applying that to your marketing and growth efforts. Before we get into the technical details, I try to skip most of the life story, but if you could give us a sentence or two about who you are and the work you do at SparkToro, and maybe what has you excited to fire up your laptop in the morning. What are you working on these days?
Ooh, I love it. Yeah, so I'm the VP Marketing over at SparkToro, the audience research startup. So marketing is a third career for me. I started out in tech news or tech journalism, pivoted into food, so was a trained chef, and then kind of stumbled into marketing. I had wanted to be a food writer, didn't do any research on that industry or what jobs there would be like, realized there was no job market for it, and then kind of found my way into content marketing. I've been doing marketing now for, maybe like 9 years or so, focused mainly on content marketing, but in the recent years have expanded into, email, performance, event, all kinds of other marketing. So
that's how marketing tends to go. You have one specialty when you come in, but you leave with a whole lot of skills. You end up being a Swiss Army knife of sorts. So I like it. Keeps the work interesting. And especially interested in hearing what you're doing at SparkToro now and maybe how the tool could be applicable to our audience, which is primarily e-commerce brands and senior leaders inside of e-commerce companies or retail companies with an e-commerce arm. Do you want to give a little spiel about SparkToro, how it came to be, what problem it solves first, and then maybe we'll get into how it applies in an e-commerce setting?
yeah, let's do it. So SparkToro helps you find your audience's sources of influence. So the way I talk about it is, when you are marketing in a certain industry for a long time, you just kind of already know where things are, where people go, what they listen to, those kinds of things. But it takes you some time to ramp up to that, right? Like if you're a brand new marketer in e-com, you don't just go into it knowing what everybody listens to, what websites they go to, what social accounts they follow. That's not instinctive. It takes you maybe a couple years to really get that kind of proficiency. But SparkToro helps you figure all that out within seconds. So an example might be in the case of, let's stick to e-com right now, right? Let's say you're in B2B e-commerce. You might be wondering, like, what do people talk about? Or what do people in e-com talk about? What podcasts do they listen to? Who are some of the people I should follow beyond some of the, super obvious, well-known six-figure following people, right? You could just type in a couple of search terms in SparkToro, like maybe something like, my audience uses these words in their profile, e-commerce founder, or VP operations in supply chain, or things that are adjacent or related to e-commerce. And then from there, you would find all of these sources of influence. So the way I kind of say it is, SparkToro helps you do all these marketing things that would normally take you years of research and trial and error to figure out.
Yeah, and thousands of conversations too, right? Like you would have to do one-on-one combat, so to speak, with customers and people in your prospective market and get them on the phone just like this and ask about their day and what's going on in their business and what pain points they have and what questions they have and missing information. And then you kind of reverse engineer, okay, well, where do you go to look for that? You start writing these lists down. You hope you don't lose them somewhere. And then you don't really have a central repository. And like you wake up a year from now and you're like, what progress have we made? Whereas like SparkToro takes all of that effort and condenses it into, I'm assuming, a search that can be done within an hour, maybe even a few minutes, who knows? So yeah, I think that's really smart. And these things are always changing too, right? So I'm guessing SparkToro stays up to date, whereas like, if you have a conference that was popular when you started your business, but you've kind of gotten out of the outdoor industry and now you're really focused in the weeds of your business and you don't go to the conferences anymore, like that might not be the hot conference anymore. There might be a new one that came up and you don't know about it because you haven't been traveling as much, but SparkToro would still find that as a developing kind of event for people to go to.
Totally, yeah. And then there's also the issue of, one thing I'll add here, there's also the issue of there's a difference sometimes between what people say they do and what they actually do. So if you were to ask people, again, maybe in e-commerce, hey, what are some publications you read or attend to, right? Someone on the spot might be like, I don't know, I read Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal. And that can be true, but are they really getting their e-commerce insights from that? What they might not tell you is maybe they are really avid readers of Websmith's 2 p.m. And they might not say it off the top of their head. They might just think like, oh, mainstream, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, which is not really helpful to you as a marketer. But you as a marketer, you want to hear about the Websmiths and the mini Websmiths. I mean, he's huge now, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read the journal because it makes me look smart and I have a subscription. But actually, I do the crossword puzzle and then it just sits on my kitchen counter until I go recycle it or something. Whereas like 2 p.m. I read thoughtfully from top to bottom. And so that kind of signal versus noise can sometimes lead you down the wrong path, right? So there's a validity to this. You know, the other thing that I see sometimes is a founder starts a business to scratch their own itch and they have a good understanding of the problem and the product that's needed to solve that. But they lose touch with that over time and they continue to operate off of that gut feel. But if the environment has changed, you may think that your customers feel one way or act one way, but that's not the case anymore because when you started your business 5 years ago, things were different then and things are in a different way now. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, we see that with user experience and stuff on the agency side when we're doing conversion optimization. Like users say when they look at a screen that I would click on this, but when you watch session recordings, they click on something totally different or they keep scrolling or they don't take the desired action. So your point about actions and words being kind of bifurcated is pretty astute because we see that in the user testing realm as well. Very cool. Well, I'd love to see the product. I think the nature of today's conversation is really about like, if I'm an e-commerce brand owner, I'm sitting here January 5th, 2022. Hopefully I've already got my marketing strategy laid out, but let's say I'm falling behind and I'm coming out of holiday break and I'm trying to start with a blank sheet of paper. Like I'm trying to figure out, where do my customers hang out? What do they like? What are the topics are they interested in? What questions do they have? And then at the very end of the process, how can I design a marketing strategy to put value and put core messages and put products in front of them? So I think that's kind of the case study we're running today. And we're going to use SparkToro to drive all that.
So we are on the SparkToro dashboard. And so today we were going to talk about the golf industry, right? We are thinking about this is an e-commerce golf company, Fescue Golf, and we are going to figure out some of the sources of influence in this audience of people who play golf. So one way I think about this, and I like to think about this as a starting point, is I like to think about who are some of the competitors in this space, like maybe some of the well-known brands. What kind of intel can we gather here? Because this will at least give us the largest swath of data. So let's think about my audience frequently visits the website. Let's try Titleist. That's a well-known golf brand, right? They do mostly golf balls, I think, and clubs. So this is a good one. All right. So we have our database has found well over 100,000 people who visit Titleist.com. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you got it. Titleist.
Yeah, so this is a huge data set. So these are all people who have publicly talked about Titleist.com online or basically have a public online presence related to this, right? So SparkToro only crawls public data. All right, so this audience, here are the behaviors and demographics of this audience. Top words in bios: golf professional, PGA, golfer husband. Totally aligns, right? No big surprises there. Top hashtags used: Team Titleist, The Open, Ryder Cup. Interesting. Frequently used phrases: Tiger Woods, PGA Tour. Great, right? So this is all very much aligning with the audience that we are, that we're looking for. So when you scroll down, and this is just on the SparkToro overview page, you can see, here's what this audience follows, visits, and engages with. So you can see some of the high level stuff, right? I really like to look at the high engagement hidden gems because these tend to signal, not always, but usually, right? These tend to signal social accounts or websites or podcasts that are not mainstream yet, but have really high engagement. So let's start looking at, let's look at the text insights first. Let's go just top to bottom here. So text insights, this is one of my favorite features in SparkToro. This crawls, so SparkToro data updates every 3 to 4 months or so. So what's good about this is you're able to see trends across seasons, right? So hashtags used, phrases used, these will change every couple months. Words in bios, these are just the self-identifiers, right? So maybe on someone's Twitter profile or their public Facebook profile, it includes golf or professional or PGA. Great, right? This aligns, kind of gives you a picture of the sort of buyer persona that you might be targeting. I like to look if there are any kinds of surprises here. University, that's kind of interesting. Manager, state, member. All right. Country club, makes sense. Let's go over to, I like phrases used. So a lot of people talking about Tiger Woods. I think he was in the news recently. I saw a video clip of him the other day. Maybe it's not new, but it was a video clip of him and his son kind of side by side, how they have very, very similar mannerisms.
Yeah.
I just kind of assumed.
They played in a tournament together recently. It was his first tournament back after a big car accident. So he was out of commission for a long time. And this was his first tournament back because he wanted to play with his son, Charlie. So it was, kind of a special moment. That's why that video was made. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good catch. So that's a great topic right there. So if you are a golf brand, you might be then thinking about like exactly this, right? Like maybe you would look for that video and amplify it in some way. Maybe, if you had some content or maybe if you had apparel, right, that was similar to what Tiger Woods would wear, maybe that would go in an email campaign, right? Like these are just kinds of different marketing ideas where you can kind of, to some extent, kind of trend jack, right? But also in a way that's just very relevant to what you're offering.
I know Tiger Woods is known for wearing bright red on Sunday when he's in contention for a tournament. Every Sunday, he wears bright red. So and that's kind of an iconic symbol. I bet that video somewhere they had his son Charlie in a red shirt with black pants, Tiger also in a red shirt with black pants, having the same mannerism. So I mean, there's a if you're an apparel brand, a golf apparel brand, there's something in there where you could be like, hey, this shirt makes Tiger Woods iconic. Our shirt can do the same for you, or whatever. Like it can be your kind of like statement piece, right? Like maybe you have a special color called Dragonfly or something like that, and you're like, Dragonfly can be your color when you go out and play on your Sundays. It doesn't matter. Like you don't have to be Tiger Woods. You could be a normal like middle class dad, but if golf is your thing and you want to feel special when you golf, like this shirt could be your Sunday red that Tiger Woods uses. There's kind of a fun campaign in there.
Oh gosh, I love that. It's a great idea. Great idea. Let's move on to social.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, because I also want to show a lot of the functionalities here. So, social people who visit Titleist.com engage most with these accounts. Obviously, Titleist makes sense. PGA Tour, Ricky Fowler, TaylorMade Golf. So, I don't think any of these are that surprising, right? But what's really cool here is we have a lists function. So maybe you wanted to, I don't know, let's just say you wanted to pick out the individuals, right? And maybe you wanted to make some kind of outreach list, right? Like maybe you wanted to do a swag drop or kind of do like a seed campaign for influencers. I'll just pick out some here. All right. So then you would go to add to list. Let's make a new list. Let's call it golf. Right. So now this list is getting curated or it's getting created. And you can also, in a list or just here, if you wanted, you could export all of these results. Maybe you wanted to send this to your team. Maybe you want to, make a couple of lists and run some comparisons across Excel and like scrub out like duplicates, that kind of thing.
Right.
You could totally do that. We'll go back to lists in a moment because it's populating right now, and I want to show you some of the contact info there. Let's go over to websites. So here are other websites that people engage with in this audience. So PGAtour.com, Barstool Sports, CBS Sports, The Athletic. Great, right? So maybe for some of these that are a little more niche, like maybe theathletic.com is a really good example here. Like maybe you could look into doing some sponsored post, right? Or figuring out some kind of collab. If there's a way to be included, maybe you'd want to suggest a sort of gift guide for an upcoming holiday and include yourself in that. Like you could do all kinds of stuff like that here.
This is where my personal browsing habits, I'd be right-clicking that link that says Analyze Website Audience, and I'd be having a tab for each relevant one. So you run the same search that we're doing for Titleist.com on 6 other sites, right? And I could just see how the breadth of the available data to do your market research expands exponentially with every new tab, right?
Definitely. So you just inspired me to click over and see what we can get here. Awesome. So people who visit theathletic.com also engage with these websites. Great. So there's a lot of similar stuff here. Barstool Sports. Well, that's huge, right? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. The Ringer, cool.
Yeah, some of this
Ri-
stuff is
yeah.
already new to me. As a golf nerd, like I'm not sure what AJC.com is, but it's
Yeah.
it's new to me. So you just kind of expand your pool, your fishing holes or whatever, like who's in your network, who you're keeping track of. Like this is already making progress.
Totally, right? And then I'm also thinking about like, okay, I see the Ringer here. I best know the Ringer as having a couple of podcasts. So maybe I would start thinking like, I wonder if it's worth figuring out how to get on the radar of some of these podcasts, right? Okay, let's go back to our original search of Titleist. Let's go to podcasts. So these are the podcasts that this audience engages with most, right? So as we marketers know, it's really hard to get podcast data, right? So the way we at SparkToro gather this data is it's based on some combination of maybe these podcasts have their own social account and people, in this audience follow those social accounts, right? So I think if you are really into golf and you follow On the Mark Golf Podcast's social account or the host's social account, fair to say that you're influenced by that podcast, right? Maybe you don't listen to every single episode, but you're probably aware of it, right? So these are a good signal that these are podcasts that are influential in your niche. So there are a whole bunch here. Maybe you would reach out with sponsorship ideas, or if it's possible and relevant, you could pitch yourself as a guest on some of these. The way I would do this is I would listen to some of these podcasts, figure out like what are some of the interests of the host, like what does the host care about, and then try to create a custom pitch based on that. Right? It's just something really personalized, and that really taps into their interests and what they're looking for.
Yeah, totally agree. And I see you have the list feature here as well as the export. So same kind of concept that we saw with the publications or the websites. It's like you basically build your lead list for a podcast promo tour, and you try to get your founder placed on there, or you try to buy ads or something like that. It really accelerates that timeline for trying to make that happen.
Totally, exactly. And then having the list or exporting the list into an Excel spreadsheet, like then you have your project management too, right? You can track like who you reached out to already, which ones you've already appeared on, things like that. Let's go to our lists and see if that populated. So lists, golf, cool. So this is what lists look like in SparkToro. I'm excited to show this because we don't always get to do this kind of deep dive. So cool. So you can see each social media channel's Spark Score and social followers. So Spark Score this measures a social account's reach relative to its following. So maybe there's a social account with, let's just say it's 50,000 followers, right? Maybe they, compared to an account with 1 million followers, get a ton of retweets, likes, and comments. That's factored into Spark Score. So, in general, higher Spark Score is good. And again, in general, what we tend to see is individuals with, or individual accounts versus brand accounts tend to have higher Spark scores. Makes sense, right? Because it's a person.
And that cuts down on your time for influencer marketing too, which is huge in the e-commerce space. Like I want to know that if sometimes the big names, the Logan Pauls of the world, I'm just using him as an example, but he might have a much lower engagement based on the size of his following than some kind of like niche influencer that has 1/10 of the number of followers, but gets many more comments, many more likes, many more retweets, reshares, whatever you want to call them. You might want to drop your product in the hands of that smaller account, just because one, they're more likely to be open to product placement. Logan Paul's kind of a big deal, but two, they seem to have a better engagement to follower ratio anyway, and the Spark Score is kind of an approximation of that.
Totally, right? And then you can even, let's say the smaller follower is just a lot more relevant to your niche, right? I think this is a really good example, right? Because let's say you were considering Logan Paul, right? Let's say like there's reason to believe that there's some overlap with the audience. I might argue as a marketer that that's too broad, right? And doing any kind of influence marketing or influencer marketing with Logan Paul would be super expensive. Like I'm going to assume it's going to be like mid 6 figures, total guess, but it's definitely not going to be, hey, we'll send you a couple of vests. Maybe
Right.
you'll post about us, right? He's not going to do that. But someone with a smaller following who has, who's a lot more relevant to the golf niche, they might be open to it, right? Or it's a paid campaign and fine, but like it probably won't cost you several $100,000.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, so we can look at the contact info here. Let's look at Ricky Fowler, get contact info. So not a great example for this particular one, but we integrate with hunter.io for email addresses and public social media. So whatever is publicly available, we're able to capture here. So sometimes it's tougher with like these larger accounts because their email addresses are not available.
Well, he's
but
a professional athlete. I don't think he wants
Totally.
his email address out there,
Right.
so
Exactly.
maybe
But
you
at
get a
least-
publicist.
But at least you'll see his other social accounts, right? Like if there's a different name or like there's, something different in their naming convention. I wonder if any of these have available. Probably not, because these are all really well-known people.
Yeah, these are all professional
Yeah.
athletes and
Yeah.
brand accounts. But there is
Yeah.
a world where, I don't know, if you are in the cooking niche or something like that, you
Mm-hmm.
might find somebody who has a more public, like a LinkedIn profile or something like that, and that's got an email address associated with it, and maybe that's public and it gets grabbed by hunter.io, or they have their own blog on a
Yeah.
custom domain and you get hello at, and that's something to work off of, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and this one you can see at least a domain. So
Yeah.
at least as much, or basically in this case, all the publicly available info that's there is here in one place. So as you export this list, you have as much data as you can possibly gather, available to you. Let's go back. Oh, you know what I wanted to show here? This might be interesting. So back to the social tab. We also have filters for any of these queries. So sometimes what I like to do when I'm searching for social accounts in a given niche, I like to filter by, hidden gems, because I just tend to like to find the really high engagement accounts with maybe lower social followings. So maybe let's do an audience size of 100,000 at a max, right? And then maybe any location. Cool. Apply filters. So this might give us these higher engagement accounts. Cool. Looks like it worked, right? So we have a lot more individuals here, which is interesting. And I'm sure that these are all obviously like well known and professionals.
Some commentators, professionals.
Yeah.
You'll probably
But
see
it's-
some instructors, like some YouTubers that do golf instruction. I bet they'll come in here.
Oh yeah. We have some reporters.
NBC Sports. I mean, that has its own value too. All of a sudden, you've got
Yeah.
a PR contact that you can reach out to when you have a product launch or something like that. So, maybe this isn't the best example, but because not everybody's in an industry where there would be athletes or celebrities or something like that overlapping. But let's just imagine that this is replaced with, bloggers, YouTubers, other types of influencers like Instagram, TikTok stars, whatever. Like those are prospects that you can actually try to go out and reach, whereas like trying to reach out to a Ricky Fowler or someone like that probably isn't as fruitful, at least not through conventional means. You would have to work with like a placement firm or something like that probably to get there.
Totally. I feel like we spent some good time on this just for the sake of getting more data or like showing more other use cases too. Maybe let's try another e-commerce industry or niche.
Let's see.
One that I like to search for is coffee, because there are a lot of coffee brands. I'm choosing coffee because one, there are a lot, like I said, there are a lot of coffee brands and a lot of up and comers. And also I love coffee. So I already know about it, and I'm kind of a nerd about it. So because of that, I have enough expertise to know some search terms that would probably yield some interesting results. So what I'm about to show you is a good example of like when you know a niche pretty well and you know some of the terminology that's used, right? Like not everybody knows that, but hopefully if you've started a coffee company,
Yeah.
you know coffee pretty well. So maybe in this case, let's say it's an e-commerce brand that sells, craft beans or nice whole roasted beans. So maybe I would do a search for my audience frequently talks about. Let's try Aeropress, right? This is a popular method for brewing coffee. Cool. So this is a smaller data set, right? 1,740 people that talk about Aeropress. And Aeropress it's a coffee making method, right? I kind of describe it as like a giant plastic syringe where you're pushing the coffee into a cup. Yeah. It's how I have my coffee every morning. But it's a good search because anybody who's talking about Aeropress publicly online is probably a huge coffee nerd, right? Or they're really, really into coffee, and they might be people in your target audience because of that. So some of their behaviors and demographics, top words in bios, specialty, roaster. Cool. All right. Top hashtags used, which could give me ideas for other searches to do. Latte art, coffee time, barista. Interesting. In terms of demographics, this is really interesting. Top job roles and fields, engineering.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if the phrase aero being on the front is like catching something with aerodynamics,
Oh, that's
aerospace, something like that.
Good question. I don't think it is in this case because we have Aeropress as one word. So we've kind of been able on our side to what is the word? Disambiguize that.
Makes sense.
But
maybe
it's
they're
cool
just engineers who need to drink a lot of coffee because their work's demanding and they're putting in long hours.
Yeah. And I also just kind of think thinking back to my tech office jobs, although it was actually a lot of the engineers who were really into Aeropress coffee. Mm-hmm. So maybe. But I think what's also interesting is you just kind of think about that for a moment. Engineers talking about Aeropress. When I think about engineers, I think of, an audience or a demographic with probably a lot of disposable income, right? So if I am a luxury coffee brand, that could signal the right fit, right? Like it's people who have the money to spend on this product. Maybe I should figure out how to get in front of them.
Yeah, especially with a renewable good or a replenishable good, you have the opportunity to land a subscription customer there. And if they fall in love with your brand, and I'm sure that stuff travels pretty quickly, word of mouth, if they bring a new bag of beans into the office and they put it in the office and people all use it to make coffee, then they all fall in love with it. And all of a sudden you're getting multiple customers, you're getting a bulk order for the office, you're getting something like that. Like they're starting to stack or stock the pantry with your brand instead of whatever the previous brand was.
Yeah.
That's a big win.
Totally. So I clicked into demographics to, give you a peek here. So we have top employer industries, computer software, internet. Oh, interesting. Years of experience. Okay.
That could give you an approximation of age, I guess. It's a rough approximation, but let's assume most people don't start becoming engineers until they're 18. So the years of experience was 11 and up was the biggest bucket. So now you're talking to 30-year-olds, right? And as a premium coffee brand, like maybe you already knew that, but maybe you didn't. Or maybe the upper end of that age spectrum is higher than you thought it was. You thought you were talking to 30 and 40-year-olds, but you've got some 60-year-olds that might be interested in Aeropress coffee or something like that. So
totally, right? And then also looking at some other interests and skills. I think it's interesting that they're really into education, arts and culture. I think it's interesting. It's not, a huge difference, but the arts and culture ranks above science and technology. Mm-hmm. That's kind of cool.
Balance, left brain, right brain,
Yeah. And they care about the environment. So that's interesting. Maybe if you had eco-friendly packaging, that could be something you might want to call out in your messaging.
Yeah. And, I think some of the things I'm noticing here is SparkToro or any other tool doesn't always have the answers, but it has the right questions you should be asking to find the answers, right? So I might not have even thought that environmental impact was important to my customer base until I saw this. And that's just one kind of piece of evidence that gets your wheels spinning. You're like, okay, maybe we have a quiz that we send out to our mailing list. It's like, how important is it to you that you have a minimal carbon footprint with the consumption methods that you have or something like that? Yeah. And then if you get that signal from your actual customer base, 80% of people care about this, then maybe you run an A/B test on the product page to present packaging as a specific benefit or value proposition or aspect of the product that somebody might care about. Then you might see your conversion rate go up as a result of that. But it's a 3 or 4 step process that was initiated by the research being done here.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Exactly. And I think there's also just, you look at all this data, it also gives you just a lot of ideas to test, right? Like, most mentioned skills, social media marketing. So if this, if you were to consider this audience as like, okay, they're really into science and arts, they're probably mostly engineers, but they're also into social media and marketing, like that could just give you ideas for ways to inform your social media campaigns, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe you'd be thinking about like, okay, well, how do I get people to share photos of their coffee? Like there could be like small moments like that. You can include maybe a small card in the packaging of your product that could inspire people to take photos of it and share it online.
Right.
I mean, that could be stuff you'd think about anyway. But I think sometimes seeing the data here kind of gives you some of those clues where you could test fun stuff like that without feeling like you're spinning your wheels with completely random ideas, right?
Right.
It at least gives you like some kind of foundation for things to consider.
And there's enough material here for 5 or 6 ad campaigns. You could have a
Yeah.
Facebook ad campaign specifically around engineers or developers at tech companies and how your coffee's better than the guy in the cubicle next to you or whatever. Like that's a campaign. And then there's one about eco-friendly packaging and like how does that resonate or whatever. There are a bunch of different campaign ideas that are coming out of this one individual tab for this one search query. And then you extrapolate that over like a dozen other keywords. And all of a sudden you've got enough to keep you busy for quite a while.
Yeah, exactly. Now we're looking at age range distribution. To your point, look, people are like in their 30s mostly, between 35 and 50. Right? I mean, based on the employment data, we're not that surprised here, right? But it's nice to see that data sort of being validated.
Right.
Education, cool. A lot of college grads. Interesting. I haven't noticed that we have a lot of most mentioned schools. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah. This could be a fun way to like, I don't know, right? This is like just a random idea. If University of Texas at Austin has a sporting event that that might be popular among your niche, you could post about that on social or I don't know, something.
Well, I was thinking, so we're just to continue this thread of engineers, like what if they have a hackathon or they have like, a startup club or an incubator of some sort, like go be the coffee that sponsors that program and just keeps them fueled through their 24-hour hackathon. Like that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Maybe you get some publicity out of it in the university's marketing campaign around it or whatever. Just so many ideas.
Totally, right? And then sponsoring something like that or like sending the coffee to that wouldn't be that expensive, right? That would be a sort of influencer, like, I don't know, seed fee, or like it'd be part of your budget where at least you're not spending thousands of dollars, on sending coffee to an event, right? Like it's just some of your product. It's a great idea. We could look at geography and political leanings. This is kind of fun. Geographic distribution. And then you could also look at political leanings, which is like based on what they are sharing publicly online. What do their political leanings look like? So they lean left mostly or center. Not that anyone needs to do a political campaign for this, but it could give you clues, right, for if you were to target your press coverage somehow, right? Like if you had to prioritize your media outreach, maybe you'd want to prioritize left-leaning publications. I don't know.
Yeah. And I know there are certain coffee brands that specifically position themselves as the best brand for military and other service members, something like that. Like I would expect that to be more balanced toward the center or right leaning, so if you're researching them, you could kind of look at the competitive landscape in competing brands or whatever and figure out like, okay, well, Death Wish Coffee, I'm just using them as an example, might be chasing all of the conservative podcasts and publications and broadcasts. So maybe we want to zig when everybody else is zagging, so to speak, if we want to stand out or whatever.
Yeah. I also wanted to show you podcasts. So this is kind of fun. These are some of the popular podcasts in this niche. Coffee Sprudgecast, Sweet Maria's Coffee, Forging Fourier, I looked this up recently. Now they've kind of rebranded to mostly fictional history, so maybe not the most relevant niche anymore. But like Coffee Spreadcast, I think I've listened to a couple episodes of this. Like they really dive into the world of coffee, and so if you listen to a couple episodes, maybe you as the founder could pitch like, oh, like, you know, you talked about the origin of these kinds of beans in your last episode. You know, we source our beans in a different region for this reason. Do you want to hear this story? Right. So like things like that at least you have that starting point of figuring out which podcast to listen to and kind of how to position your product or your company for these different opportunities.
Yeah, for sure.
What else is there? Social.
Talk to me about the custom audiences. So I see that at the very top. There's like lists and then there's custom audiences. And how are those different?
Yeah. So custom audiences. So this works well if you already have a long list of like social URLs. Like maybe you are already a pretty well-known brand, right? And maybe you have like 10, 20,000 Twitter followers, we'll say. What you could do is you can upload a list of those Twitter URLs. Let's see. So we conduct the custom analysis of any group with at least 1,000 profiles. So you don't need to have like 10,000, but you know, the more data, the better. Like with anything, right? And then from there, we can show you the sources of influence for your specific audience. So this just works the best when you have data for when you have like a pretty large data set. So
yeah, so it's like Facebook audiences where you can upload a list of existing customers and then they'll put your ads in front of people who are interested in the same things, around the same age, in the same geography, whatever. It's like a lookalike kind of thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's like the non-creepy version.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We don't want any creepiness around here. Cool. One other question I had was around the text insights. So my background, kind of like yours, is content marketing, copywriting, that kind of thing. Like I'm always thinking about what's the message that's going to resonate. And so I saw some of the keywords, but like in terms of taking what somebody's talking about and going a little bit deeper in there and saying like, you know, okay, so they're in their profile, they're calling themselves a professional, and that's like a PGA professional or whatever. But like, how do you get to those problems, those complaints, you know, the things that really are good indicators of like, I want to solve this. I want to remove this pain. I want to answer this question. And sometimes there's a purchase or some kind of an engagement around that is beneficial for an e-commerce brand or software tool or anything else. Like you want to know the customers that have the problems so you can kind of respectfully interject yourself into that situation and say, I have what you're looking for and here's what it is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a really good question. The way that I like to talk about this is kind of working backwards, right?
And maybe it's not finding them on social media and engaging in the conversation, but like, how do I take what I'm learning in SparkToro and build the next headline for my product detail page or build the headline in my hero section that has that compelling value proposition?
Totally, right? So I would think about this like, what are the kinds of audiences you want to get in front of? So, and by that, I mean, let's take a totally different example here. Let's say you are a, you know, health or medical company, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to get in front of the people who care about health, right? And then maybe this is a really broad audience. It could, because anyone who cares about health could be anybody. But let's use this as an example. Maybe I would start with my audience follows a social account, New York Times Health, right? Because it's a huge audience. You're probably going to get a ton of data. So I ran this search, found over 200,000 people who follow NYT Health. Okay. So remember, these people may or may not have heard of you yet, you as a health company. But it's the audience you want to get in front of. From here, then I would look at these text insights. Okay. So we know that people who follow NYT Health use these words in their bio. What is there? Wellness, medical, wellness, public, university, opinions. It's probably people who say opinions are my own. Mm-hmm. Author, writer, medicine. Okay, this is a really medical, like focused audience. Maybe this is who I want to get in front of. Let's look at their phrases used. mental health, public health, social distancing, older adults, clinical trials, health equity, health systems. Like these to me are all clues for topics you would want to talk about, topics you would pitch maybe as a guest piece or for in your media coverage. It could help inform your positioning, right? Like if you are some kind of medical company that helps with clinical trials, boom, clinical trials, you should include that. But one way that I think about this, and I'm citing this because this actually worked with one of our customers. One of our customers used this sort of approach to get media coverage. So what they did was they did a search for people in the publication's audience. It wasn't New York Times Health, but let's pretend it was. And then they looked at the text insights and said, hey, based on the SparkToro data that we pulled, we see a lot of people in your audience are talking about social distancing, healthcare workers, older adults, and clinical trials. We have a product, right, that specializes in, making sure clinical trials are running more effectively, which we think is going to be really useful as we are in the tail end of this pandemic. And as you try to figure out the efficacy of whatever, certain medicine in older adults, right? Like, so just showing like people in your audience are already talking about these topics, and we have the unique product or offering that helps you tell that story. So that's one way I might approach that.
Yeah, it's kind of like some of the popular advice when you're job hunting is like you want to put the keywords in your resume or your cover letter because there's this arbitrary like artificial intelligence system that looks for those, and the more times you mention them, you automatically make it through the first filter, right? And you get the consideration stage or whatever. So it's kind of the same thing. You're doing it with a PR pitch, and you're like, I know that your audience is talking about this. Therefore, it's probably top of mind for you. I'm pitching you a story that hits these 3 keywords that you're thinking about. I have a much better chance of hearing yes to that request than maybe somebody else does that has more of a templated response.
Exactly. And then also with some of the terminology here, right, we saw older adults. And I'm calling this out because I know that, I used to work in healthcare marketing. The topic of the terminology of older adults was always kind of tricky because it was like, is that correct? Is that PC terminology, right? Mm-hmm. Like I used to think that seniors was preferred, like senior citizens, say seniors. That was what I thought. But as I kind of learned more about this and positioning, I learned that older adults was the preferred language. So there are things like that you can kind of learn, or like you kind of see these clues for that can help inform that positioning in your own marketing, right? So maybe in your own marketing, you take that into account. You're like, okay, we're not going to say seniors. We thought that was the right angle. We're going to say older adults, and people will know what that means.
Yeah, it's a great example. Another one I've heard recently from a partner of ours. We're working on a white paper, and the phrase they use is active agers. And I've never heard that phrase, but it sounds great. And I just immediately thought, that's an ad. That's a headline. Yeah. That's packaging copy on the like. This is the coffee brand for active agers or something. Like maybe it's a little gentler on your gut or something like that. I don't know, but like that's a phrase that you might not come up with organically, but through a search like this, your audience might describe themselves as an active ager, or they might follow an account that publishes about active agers, and you're like, okay, what is that? You do a little Google search, like, yeah, that applies to me and my demographic. Let me steal that phrase. Let me start dropping that into my marketing messaging because it seems to have some momentum behind it, right? And some relevance. So
totally. And then also when you think about these things, like yes, as marketers, we should always be testing things, but sometimes you kind of just have to make a decision and move forward, right? You can't survey every single thing you do. You can't hop on the phone with every customer and say, hey, do you like active agers? Right? Sometimes you kind of just have to choose. And this, these insights help you, move in that kind of direction, help you make a decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, cool. Well, listen, I've taken up enough of your time today. I think that the walkthrough that you gave was super helpful. And we already talked about a bunch of different things. We talked about how you can build a podcast outreach campaign. We talked about PR. We talked about Facebook ad campaign and building that targeting for your demographics and testing different messaging on product detail pages, landing pages. I mean, we covered so much. Influencer campaigns. I don't even think I mentioned that yet. We did all of that, and you can search for competitors. You can search for publications in your industry, or I'm sure that you could probably, if you're a more established brand, run this on your own site and see what like your audience is saying about you, or who they also follow, if they follow you, that kind of thing. That's a great way to reverse engineer some audience growth tactics. So there's just so much you can do with it. It's hard to communicate all the different ways somebody should like hang up from this call and go do their thing. I really appreciate the breadth and the level of detail that you've given us here today. Is there anything else that you maybe didn't mention or that you want to leave folks with? A call to action to go visit SparkToro, anything like that? This is kind of your opportunity to step up on the soapbox and say your piece.
Awesome. Yeah. So check us out, SparkToro.com. We also have an audience research newsletter, which is a twice monthly newsletter that helps you figure out what to do with audience research in your marketing campaigns. You do not have to be a SparkToro user to benefit from the newsletter, but it's better if you are. So check us out. And then anyone listening, watching, if you have a custom query you want me to run for you, just as a favor, email me, Amanda@SparkToro.com. Happy to help however I can. Usually can't do one-on-one demos, but love to answer questions async.
Yeah. What a very generous offer. And I will say you had a workshop series going on for a while. It was very contextual examples of how to use SparkToro for X. And there was one on agency marketing, I think, that I definitely attended. So those are well worth attending if that's something you have time for and you're listening to the show. And also, Amanda is a phenomenal follow on Twitter. I'll do the service for her and say go follow her at Amanda Nat, N-A-T. Go give her a follow because one of the best that I have, and I've got the notifications turned on for you, Amanda. So thank you so much for joining the show, and we'll look forward to having you back sometime to hear what you've got going on at SparkToro or whatever you're up to next.
I'd love that. Thank you so much for having me, James. This was fun.